Hello, my name is Patrick Sterrett, and I'm a program manager on the Dynamics 365 Customer Insights product development team. Today I'm going to walk through the steps required to create a unified customer profile using customer data from two different line of business systems. For this tutorial series, let's assume that I work for Contoso Coffee. Contoso Coffee sells coffee through retail stores as well as through an online web store. We use Dynamics 365 Customer Insights as the center of our digital transformation effort. Like many companies, Contoso collects customer information across a number of different disconnected systems, but needs to be able to produce a 360-degree view of the customer and produce actionable insights. Okay, let's start this tutorial. I'm going to show you how to create a unified customer profile that combines customer information from two different and unconnected source systems. In this example, I will use customer information from Contoso's CRM system, which is based on Dynamics 365, as well as Contoso's online web store, which uses a proprietary e-commerce platform. The first step is to create data connections to the source systems. Note that Customer Insights uses the Dynamics Power Query connectors, so this may be familiar to you if you've already used products like Power BI. Let's start by making the connection to the CRM data. On the menu, click on Data Sources and enter a friendly name for this data source. Now we see a list of connectors that can be used to connect to the source. In this case, we are connecting to Dynamics 365 CRM data, so we will use the Common Data Service connector. Sometimes we refer to this as the CDS connector. On this screen, we enter in the location of the server and the credentials that are required to have read access to that data source. The Common Data Service connector lets us explore all of the entities that are configured there. In this case, we want to connect to the contact entity, so we can search for it and select it. Now that we've selected the contact entity, we can configure or transform the way that data is brought into the Customer Insights, pulling in just the data attributes that we care about for the unified profile. First, we will give a name for this query. This name is going to be used as the name of the entity when the data appears in Customer Insights. Next, let's choose the columns that we want ingested into Customer Insights using the Manage Columns option. This is an optional step, but I know that there are several columns in the source data that won't be useful for analytics, so I'll just pick the columns that I think I need. Note that I can change this later if needed. Because I am connecting to the Common Data Service, this connector knows the attribute names and data types automatically, so I don't have to configure any of that. However, in a later part of this tutorial, I will show how additional configuration can be done as needed. Okay, so now we've created our first data source, and we now also have our first entity defined in the system, which is the customer information coming in from the CRM contact entity. Now, let's establish a connection to the online sales customer data from our e-commerce system. As before, we will give a friendly name to this data source that we are adding. Now we will choose the appropriate connector. In this case, the online sales data is hosted in an Azure Blob. So we will select the Azure Blob connector, type in the URL to where the data is hosted, add our credentials, and now we can explore the data that's hosted on that blob. In this case, I will select the contact information, which is a CSV file that holds the latest contact list. Now we see a preview of the data. Like before, we will give this query a descriptive name, as this is what the entity will be called when it is configured in Customer Insights. The other thing to note is that because we loaded this data from a comma-separated value file, we need to tell the system about the column names and data types. In the data, you can see that the first row actually has the column names. So I will use the Transform Table menu and select the Use First Row as Headers option. Now that the headers are updated, I can also change data types if needed. In this data, I may want to do date arithmetic on the date of birth or created on columns. So I will tell the system that these are actually date types. Things look good now, and this configuration will be used every time that the data is refreshed. Okay, so now we have two configured data sources and two entities configured that represent data coming from two different source systems. One thing to note is that if you need to make changes to the data source configuration, you can click on the Actions button and go to the Edit menu. Now that the entities are connected and loaded, let's unify the data from these two sources to create our unified customer profile. From the menu, I will select Unify, which brings up the 3 steps required for creating a unified profile: Map, Match, and Merge. We will go through each of these steps in order, and when we are done, we will then have a new unified profile entity that is based on the rules and configurations that we are setting in each of these stages. When we go into the map configuration, we first need to select the entities that we want to unify. Now we will tell the system how to interpret or map the semantic meaning and type of those attributes by using common definitions. We also need to pick a primary key for each of the entities we're going to unify. You will notice that Customer Insights is recommending the attribute types based on smartly inspecting your data. You can use these as defaults or override them by clicking on the type field. Now the configuration is done, so I'll save it and I'll go back to the Unify screen. The next step is to configure the match rules. This will tell the system how to unify your data from the two different sources. In Match, we set rules about the way matching is done between the entities that are being unified. The first entity is called the primary entity, and usually you would want to pick the one that is your most complete source or highest quality data source. In this case, I am picking the Dynamics CRM source as though it to be the most complete for Contoso. Because it is the most complete set, I will also tell the system to include all of the records from this source, even if nothing matches from other entities. I set the online sales entity as the second entity and click Done. So now that we have picked the entities to be matched, we need to set the specific matching rules. I will start by giving this rule a friendly name. If you recall, Contoso does not have a unique customer identifier that is shared between CRM and online sales. However, both systems have reasonably high-quality email addresses, since sales agents using CRM use email to communicate with customers, and the customers themselves have an incentive to give a good email address when ordering online. Under the match conditions, I select email address 1 from the CRM source and email from the online sales source. Now I know that neither source system validates for things like capitalization, so I will use the normalize dropdown to do inline normalization of these fields to improve their matchability. Specifically, I will have the system remove any white spaces and put all the text into lowercase on the fields that are being matched. Now we can set the match precision slider to a setting that's appropriate for the data that we're matching. In this case, I want to match exactly on the email address. However, if I was using something like customer name, I might choose a lower precision to give me higher recall on these matches. Back on the match screen, we can review the match order and rules. This looks all okay, so I will save it and run it. The system is now telling us that it was able to find 5,268 unique records and was able to match 5,001 between the two sources. This is because we told it to use everything from the CRM source, which has 5,268, and it looks like every customer entry on the online sales system had a corresponding customer entry in CRM, meaning that we had a 100% match rate. Let's return back to the Unify screen and go into Merge, which is the final step in configuring the unified customer rules. The merge step will combine attributes from all of the matched source entities, but will use precedence logic to determine which attribute value to show in the merged profile. For example, if you have full name in both source systems, we can configure the precedence order on which one to use. I will set it to use full name from CRM and then online sales. With this configuration, if the full name field was populated in CRM, that's the one that will be used in the unified profile. However, if it was blank in CRM, the one from online sales would be used instead. Now, let's save and run this configuration. Now that we've completed the unification configuration, we have one final step before we can see the unified profile. When I click onto the Customers tab for the first time, I'm prompted to configure the search and filter index. This index is used to enable quick searches and filtering of the unified profiles based on attributes that you want to search or filter on. So we need to add a few fields into the index by clicking on the field name, such as customer name, email address, or location. Okay, everything looks good, so let's save it and run it. And now, when we return to the Customer tab, we see the unified profiles that were created by the system. Because we configured the search and filter index, we can also do quick searches on any of the indexed fields. If I type a name into the search box, the view is filtered down to the set of customers that contain that name. I can do the same thing for cities. Okay, this is now the end of this tutorial. To recap, we have now created a unified customer profile that is unifying data from our CRM system and our online sales system. In other tutorials, we will show how to create segments, measures, activities, and other insights by bringing in additional signal about these customers from different systems and relating it to the unified profile. We hope that you have found this tutorial useful and hope that you enjoy using Dynamics 365 Customer Insights. Thank you.